In this video, I'm going to break down the number one thing that holds most of us back from getting all the things that we want in life, which is fear. But I'm not going to do it in a way that most people talk about it, like false evidence appearing real or just power through it. You have to understand how fear actually operates if you want to control it. And the only way to control it is to understand it. That's what I'm going to break down for you in this video. Now, this is a chunk out of one of our paid programs called Transformational Storytelling and Speaker Training. So the context is speaking, but the concept can be applied to anything.
Let's dive into fear. I'm going to put it in the context of speaking because that's the program that we're in. But if you don't really resonate with having a bunch of speaking fears, then you can apply this to really anything. It's not just about speaking. Because we're talking about fear itself, not just certain applications. And that's one of the big reasons that a lot of people don't handle or don't clear a lot of their fears, is because they think that the fear of speaking operates completely differently than the fear of being dumped in a relationship, than the fear of flying, or the fear of networking, or like, we think that all these fears are in silos. And they're generally not, but we have to understand the essence of fear. And then we can apply some of the solutions to the applications of fear. And I didn't go after this phrase, this first bullet. I've never gone after it the way I thought about it this morning as I was writing up these notes. So one of the common ways to handle fear is that fear stands for false evidence appearing real. And that's super cool and super sexy, and it makes for a fantastic social media meme, and it's almost useless. And the reason I say it's almost useless is because I don't know of anybody who encounters a fear and then reminds themselves false evidence appearing real, and then the fear goes away. So I say it's useless because it doesn't solve the problem for people. And it's because it's this intellectual reframe. It's a cool thing. The acronym, I love acronyms. The acronym is awesome. And if we're really going to go after what fear is, then this is going to be complete BS. And the reason is because fear is not false evidence appearing real. Fear is valid evidence producing real feelings. That's what fear is. The evidence is not false. The evidence is valid. You see people's face scrunch up in the audience, that's valid evidence. You see people yawning or falling asleep during your talk, or whatever the fears are that you have, that's valid evidence. If we just pretend that the evidence is false, we're lying to ourselves. And we're just playing this game of pretend and make-believe, which is not going to solve the challenge. It's not going to actually solve anything. And we have to understand that we're not playing make-believe here. These are real feelings. The fears that we create are real, and they're based on valid experiences. So we can't just pretend, oh no, that's just fake and that's just false, and then actually handle the problem. It's not going to work that way. Now, conventional trainings, speaker training specifically, and conventional wisdom, and a lot of the common conversation, what they do with fear is they just try to remove the evidence. So for instance, with speaking, let's say, a lot of the speaker training is to basically learn the rules and the tools so that you don't mess up. Now, what we're afraid of is messing up and then the audience reacting in some way, or we feel embarrassed, or we tell a joke and it doesn't land, and so they don't laugh, right? So if we try to figure out or try to learn the ways to do it right, what we're trying to do is avoid the evidence. We're trying to cause the evidence to not show up. In other words, we're trying to make sure that nobody falls asleep during our talk, or nobody yawns during our talk, or nobody checks our phone during our talk, or that we don't forget anything during our talk. We're trying to get rid of the things that are wrong, that are potentially wrong. we're trying to get rid of them. And we're trying to get rid of the evidence that they occurred instead of handling the feeling. So my question to you is, would you rather try to do everything you can to make sure somebody doesn't fall asleep? Or would you rather fix whatever's going on internally so that if somebody does fall asleep, you're still okay? My point is, there are things that are going to happen in the audience. Even when you're doing well, there are things that are going to happen in the audience. And if you're afraid of the evidence, then you're always going to be out of control. You're always going to be worried about the things that you're seeing. You're always going to be externally focused. And that is how to become unstable very quickly. The way to be unstable is put all your awareness and focus externally and seek your validation and approval from the evidence that you're seeing outside. Because you're constantly going to be looking for evidence that makes you feel good and trying to avoid evidence that makes you feel bad, but you're going to be looking for that evidence because it's all based on the fear of actually seeing the evidence. So everything is lighting up doing it wrong. And a better way to go is actually to heal whatever needs to be healed, to clear whatever feelings need to be cleared or fears need to be cleared, so that when things happen outside of you, it doesn't completely destroy you. You might get disrupted, and we'll go into, not on this call, but later on in the program, we'll go into ways to handle what's going on around you during your talk, and there's all kinds of things to consider. But if you're internally focused and internally rooted, then you're not going to be looking for all this external evidence. And that's why most trainings around fear, and most training specifically for speakers, actually increases our fears of doing it wrong. So basically what we're doing is something that I call trigger avoidance. We're trying to avoid the triggers of the fear. I ask this question all the time: how many people are afraid of flying, in an audience? And usually a few hands go up. How many people are afraid of heights? How many people are afraid of speaking? How many people are afraid of networking? How many people are afraid of whatever? And, hands go up with all the questions, because these are some of our more common fears. But the key here to understand is that nobody's afraid of the thing. Like, nobody's afraid of flying. People are afraid of dying in a plane crash, and that's different. Nobody's afraid of heights. They're afraid of falling and getting hurt from high places. That's different. The reason this is different is because we have to separate the trigger from the outcome of the trigger. But because of the way that fear works, we try to protect ourselves. And so if we get bitten by a dog, let's say, our mind will tell us, don't go near any dogs. What we're really afraid of is not a dog. We're afraid of the pain of a dog bite. And most of the time, we're not going to get bitten by dogs. But our fear gets overgeneralized because it wants to protect us, right? The bite from the dog happens first, and then the pain from the dog bite happens. What the brain does is it transfers the pain from the bite onto the trigger, onto the thing called dog in this case. And then we're afraid of dogs. And then that fear can actually become even more overgeneralized to where we become afraid of animals or anything with teeth or anything with four legs. We might even become afraid of anything with a mouth because we're transferring the pain to the thing that could lead to the pain. So if somebody has a fear of speaking and that fear is based on screwing up, you don't want to screw up. Here's the way you'll never screw up speaking. I have a way for you to never, ever mess up speaking. Don't ever speak. That's the way to do it. That's the way the brain operates in creating the fear. It says, okay, I'm going to give us a fear of speaking so that we don't go up there and experience the thing that we're apparently really terrified of. So I'm going to protect you by not allowing you to get on the stage. How do we protect ourselves from feeling heartbreak? We don't get into relationships. Or if we do get into a relationship, we don't fully open ourselves up to somebody, because the way that you can make sure somebody doesn't break your heart is you don't give it to them to break. So the way that fear operates, it transfers the fear from the outcome to the trigger. And then all we can do is avoid the trigger. So people who are afraid of flying, they either need to heal that fear or they can't fly, because flying is the trigger. People who are afraid of falling from high places, they have to not put themselves in high places. They have to avoid the trigger. And that always will put us in a place of being a victim out of control, because the triggers are all around us and we can't control what other people do or circumstances in our environment. So the more that we put our focus on the triggers outside and then we try to avoid them or we try to pretend they're not there, the less control we have. And here's one thing that does not help a fear: less control. So if you already have a fear of speaking, let's say, and then you add less control, meaning you're trying to memorize all these rules and tools and techniques and what to do right and what to do wrong, that actually puts you in less control. It doesn't seem like it. It seems like you're learning the right thing to do. But if you understand the way fear actually works, we're giving up a piece of our control, and now we're just trying to make sure that we do it the right way. And when we attempt to do things the right way, what we're actually doing is trying to make sure we don't do them the wrong way. Now, that distinction sounds exactly the same, doing it right versus not doing it wrong, but it's not. It's not coming from the same place. If we're doing things right so that we don't do them wrong, then really we're being driven still by the fear of doing it wrong. We're not actually excited about doing it right. Hopefully that makes sense, because understanding that distinction and what's the actual driver underneath the fear will hopefully help you understand why learning the rules doesn't change that we're being driven by the fear. And all we're doing then is just covering it up. We're just trying to put on a bigger or better or more efficient protection mechanism. So if we go after fear the way that most people do, it's futile, because all of the focus is external and it relies on a fallacy that the triggers actually are avoidable. Meaning it relies on this crazy idea that if you do everything right as a speaker, everybody's going to like you. Or if you get really good at telling jokes, everybody's going to think you're funny. If you get really good at the speaking rules, then nobody's going to get up and walk out. Nobody's going to be checking their phone. So it operates on this false belief that if you do it right, then the triggers won't happen. And that's why it's bullshit. Because you can be amazing and the triggers are still going to happen. Because we're dealing with humans and we're dealing with a distracted society. Nowadays, distraction is in the fabric of our society. And we can't go up on stage and change the fact that this human being is a distractible human being. And we think that if we don't say then they won't check their phone. Now, of course, nobody makes that specific connection. That's basically what we're doing. If we do the right thing, then they won't do the wrong thing. And that just constantly puts us in this state of really being a victim to other people's actions. And again, things that we can't control. Now, with speaking specifically, what this means, this hit me so hard this morning as I put this sentence together. It means your audience is the bad guy. Your audience is one of your main monsters to avoid. And if your audience is your adversary, if your audience is the thing that you're trying to protect yourself from, energetically, you're screwed. Because you cannot connect while you're trying to protect from the same thing. You can't connect to the audience while you're trying to protect from the audience. But if we don't understand how to handle these fears internally, then the audience by default is the trigger. It's the place where the bad evidence gets found. And so we place our audience in a negative light energetically, and we actually transfer some of our fears to the audience. And then we try to appease the audience. We try to appeal to them. We try to do the things that will make them approve of us. And in any scenario, when we're trying to do things that make somebody else approve of us, we are screwed. Because as soon as we replace one audience with another audience, or a single person with another person, or another person just enters the audience, now we have a new set of standards to try to get our approval from. And the same thing that works with one audience might not work with another audience. And the same thing that works with the left half of an audience might not work with the right half of an audience. So anytime that we're constantly trying to get our approval from external means, we are in big, big trouble. I already mentioned this a little bit, but I want to take this a step further. Fear is always protection from the thing happening. But we got to understand, why would we ever protect something? Why do mothers yell at their children if they're getting ready to run into the street? Why do we do anything to protect other people or things from being damaged? It's because we care. If I didn't care about these walls, let's say, then I wouldn't give a damn if somebody came in and screwed it all up. If we didn't care about our car, then we wouldn't care if somebody like scratched it with a key. It wouldn't matter to us because we don't love or care about the thing. So this is so important to understand. Our protection in the form of fear is coming from a place of love. It's coming from a place of care. We don't have embedded in us this like evil presence that really wants us to suffer. Our fears actually want us to stay safe. Our fears want us to have fun. Our fears want us to enjoy life. It's just that they've been told that going up on that stage is not the way to stay safe. So they're not trying to make our lives miserable. They're trying to keep our lives from being miserable. But they're operating with some false definitions of misery and a misunderstanding of what's actually creating the misery. So if we understand that our fear of speaking or our fear of vulnerability or visibility or whatever our fears are, if we understand that those fears are actually rooted in love and not anger, then the way that we remove them is also with love and not anger. We can't just get tough on ourselves, try to do tough love with ourselves and say, well, you should be over this by now. You know this. You've been doing this for a long time, damn it. Why don't you just get over the fear already? It's only false evidence appearing real, for crying out loud. That kind of conversation doesn't change people's fears because that's not what created the fear in the first place. So in order for fear to exist, there must be a perceived negative outcome. The fear of flying has a perceived negative outcome of dying in a plane crash. If everybody knew that their plane would have no problems, no turbulence, no challenges, and land safely and softly every time, nobody would have a fear of flying because there's no negative outcome. Unless the act of flying creates like pressure in their ears or something like that, that's different. But if we take those away, most people's fear of flying is really about dying. So there's got to be a potential negative outcome or a perceived negative outcome for a fear to exist. We are never afraid of anything that cannot produce a negative outcome. Let me say that again. We are never afraid of anything that cannot produce a negative outcome. In other words, the negative outcome is the operating ingredient. It's a required ingredient for fear. Understand how I'm going to word this. For fear to be created. So what that means is if we remove the outcome, this brain cannot create the fear.
Now, if you like this video, check out that video where I applied this concept in a coaching context and help a lady clear a deep fear.
That brought some tears, so I would say death. No. I'm afraid of him dying. I'm afraid of losing him.
And now my question for you is, what's the truth?